If you hate the DC universe and continuity, its heroes, coherent storytelling, and comic books in general, this series was tailor-made for you. Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and I'm going to fill you in on the latest chapter of Tom King's personal therapy session, disguised as a comic book, Heroes in Crisis number 7. Before I get too far into the review, I wanted to point out that despite being prominently featured on the cover, Superman isn't in a single page of this comic book. I absolutely hate the current industry's tendencies for bait and switch or outright false advertising with comic book covers. This practice needs to end immediately. Back to the issue at hand, the terrible Heroes in Crisis series. Issue 6 was easily the worst comic book I read in recent memory. If you took issue 6 as your personal jumping off point, or saw the writing on the wall and bailed earlier, you're the real winner in all of this. Issue 7 doesn't reach the depths of awful issue 6 did, but don't worry, it's terrible in its own unique ways. In an interview with TheNerdist.com, writer Tom King spoke about Heroes in Crisis. I've always focused on the breaking point more than the actual putting back together, and I want to write about that experience, and how that sort of affected me when I was broken, and how I had to find a way to see how brittle I was. Therein lies the problem with the entire series. This is a deeply personal, therapeutic experience for King, so he can disregard decades of character history, recite poetry ad nauseum, and string the story on far too long because the series isn't meant to entertain DC Comics readers. The purpose is for King to explore his own brokenness and fragility, and that is the core of this creative fiasco. Generally speaking, artist Clay Mann has belied the terrible writing and delivered a tour de force of stellar artwork. Unfortunately, issue 7 is artist by committee and helps weigh the issue down in the end. Mann's clean line work and stellar facial expressions still stand out as excellent, but Clay continues to be bogged down by the now infamous 9-panel layouts with layers of pretentious dialogue and body language. Apparently, Dave Gibbons is the only artist who can make this staple the least bit interesting. If Mann illustrated the entire issue, it would grade well in spite of this, but DC made one highly inexplicable art decision this issue. Jorge Fornes' art is far more basic and doesn't stand up to Mann or Travis Moore, the other artist on the issue. Fornes illustrates the scenes involving Batman and Flash hunting Booster and Blue Beetle. I can see this working on its own, but here it falls short in comparison and fails completely with respect to Flash. Flash's speed power and red and yellow uniform are tailor-made for terrific visuals, but Fornes makes the hero look rather boring throughout. The next decision maker who places him on a Flash book should be fired immediately. Travis Moore handles most of the action pieces, and while it's not quite as good as Mann's work, it certainly holds up. He has a flair for heroic poses, and his line work places the characters in motion very well. Tomeu Morey is excellent as always with his color work, and makes the contrast between Mann and Moore's artwork more seamless than it should be. The art by committee approach falls short in issue 7, the styles are far too divergent, and I'll score the art a 3.5 out of 5. As the series has progressed, Tom King's story has gotten progressively less coherent, but in my estimation, his most egregious errors are his characterization. The opening page is Wally West visiting a garden and reciting poetry. I groaned immediately. If Tom King never places another sonnet or line of poetry in his comics, it will be far too soon. I am so damn sick of him leaning on this crutch. I get it. King likely turned to poetry to get him through some of his darkest times, but every single character he writes are motivated by Sylvia Plath and A.E. Houseman now. Most of King's default settings are pretentious to begin with, but the constant poetry is King at his pretentious zenith. Generally speaking, I feel his treatment of Wally West has been the most flagrantly awful. However, his writing of Harley Quinn throughout Heroes in Crisis has been a very close second. He has overpowered her to the point of defeating the Trinity single-handedly, and has continually devolved her into a hysterical, nursery rhyme-obsessed abomination. His dialogue with the character has been of epically bad proportions, and this scene is as bad as everything else. After Harley spares Booster's life, he asks about the nursery rhyme prattle. She explains, "You're supposed to talk while superheroing." Is Harley Quinn a new character? How does DC editorial allow this to pass through their oversight? And don't even get me started on Batgirl being Harley's backup to start the issue. Now let's get back to the deconstruction of Wally. The absolute bane of this series' existence has been the MTV real-world style confessionals in these dreadful 9-panel layouts. This pretentious staple of Mr. Miracle and now Heroes in Crisis are key in every issue, and I defy anyone to show me one solid character moment they've provided. They're overly depressing, boring, and eminently skippable, and perfectly emblematic of the entire Heroes in Crisis series. Tom King's character work has hit rock bottom in issues 6 and 7, and I'll give it a 0.5 out of 5. While the plot in issue 6 failed to progress the overall story even an inch, at least there is some progression in issue 7. Overall, the plot is confused and overstuffed, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think I got all the details straight, and this issue sucks far too hard for me to subject myself to further torture, but I got the basics. Harley tries to kill Booster for murdering Ivy. Batgirl and Blue Beetle watch and converse. Batgirl figures out Beetle's conscience is powering Booster's shields, so Batgirl knocks Beetle out to disable them and instructs Harley not to kill Gold. And no, I did not make that up. Harley is ready to deliver the death blow and can't do it. The four immediately become besties and discuss what they know. The unlikely superhero quartet realize Wally's body was 5 days older than the time of death when discovered, so he must be alive, and they just need to find him. They also decide telling the Justice League wouldn't make any sense. Again, I ain't making this up. It's in the damn book. Right here on the page I'm showing you. Look. It's there, trust me. The easiest story to follow is Batman and Flash investigating the murders at Sanctuary. Batman has pinpointed Booster and Blue Beetle as his prime suspects and has surveillance on every known safe house the pair have ever used, and even a few off-the-books locations Bat's kept to himself. Flash can't wait for Batman's alarms to trigger and searches every continent individually before returning and informing Batman he's found nothing. I believe this was supposed to be funny, but when you're as annoyed as I am with this series, Keen's going to have to work much harder to get a smile, let alone an actual laugh from me. After Flash runs himself ragged, Batman's alarm finally triggers, and they're off to find Booster and Beetle. The event in Wally's story is probably even more confusing than the Harley Booster angle. Wally is looking at flowers, thinking about his wife, and snaps his fingers. He emits a bit of electricity and charges a flower he's touching. And from the flower emerges Poison Ivy in an admittedly beautiful piece of art. Ivy is grateful Wally has restored her to life as Wally apologizes that she'll have to see something disturbing. When she asks what, he explains she'll see his death as another Wally West arrives. How Wally is still alive, which one is him from the correct timeline, and how he resurrected Ivy are all unclear. I'm sure King has a crackerjack reveal that would be exciting, but I've slogged through 7 issues of progressively more mediocre story at this point and could care less who did what or why. There is some story progression, so it's a step up from issue 6, and I'll give King's plot work a 1 out of 5. If you hate the DC universe and continuity, its heroes, coherent storytelling, and comic books in general, this series was tailor-made for you. Unfortunately, this is marketed toward DC Comics readers, and if you're still reading the series, I'm glad I don't have to endure this alone. Heroes in Crisis issue 7 is a further descent into the worst of Tom King's creative tendencies, and I rate it a 1 out of 5 overall. The series started out underwhelming, but had the promise of a great murder mystery wrapped in pretentiousness and depression. Those feelings have long faded, and there isn't a reveal or character moment great enough to salvage this absolute train wreck. Please join me for future reviews of Heroes in Crisis issues 8 and 9. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews, and don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.